Okay, guys, so today we're going to be talking about the essay that you guys have coming up, essay 3, and what we can do to prepare for it. We've already talked about writing about literature, that chapter, and also analysis, that chapter. So we're going to be applying those two genres to the literature that we just read over spring break, A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. And we're going to be talking about how we're going to analyze it, which means breaking it down into its parts and explaining how those parts work together for the whole to be understood. And we're also going to be talking about the writing about literature chapter and using those literary concepts like symbols, irony, similes, and metaphors, and so on to help us break the literature down. So, when you're getting ready to write this essay, I want you to focus on one theme that you find most important throughout this piece of literature. And I want you to tell me why you think that theme is important. So, for your thesis, I need you to answer two questions. Which theme is most important to you in understanding A Rose for Emily? And why is that theme most important? If you answer those two questions, that'll be your thesis. Then your body paragraphs, your topic sentences are going to be focused on one literary concept at a time. Those literary concepts are in that writing about literature chapter. There are similes, metaphors, irony, symbols, setting, characters. So we're going to be going through some of that today when we're talking about Rose for Emily. And we'll be talking about how we can actually analyze this piece of literature, breaking it down into its parts so that we can better understand the whole. Now, keep in mind that your paper is due on April 13th, so you've got about 2 weeks. You need to go ahead and start your research. You need to be out there looking for research that you can use. You need to also be rereading this short story and going through and highlighting different symbols, different instances of irony, different similes and metaphors, and things that give us clue to the settings, different things that help us understand the characters, plot points. So you need to be going through and getting all this information together so that you can get ready to start writing that rough draft and organizing that outline. So today I've asked a guest to come and help me explain this to you guys. Typically in the classroom, we would talk about it together in a conversation format between you and I. But unfortunately, because of the isolation, we're not going to be able to do that. So I have asked a local English high school teacher to come on and help me to discuss this with you guys. So you won't be able to see him, but you should be able to hear his voice. Can you say hi to the class?
Hi, how are you?
Okay, so he teaches ninth and 10th grade English at Gurdon High School, and his students will actually be going over this as well. This is often taught in freshman classes at college as well as high school classes. Now, I'm sure they probably won't go as in depth with it as we are today, but he's going to be a big help because he knows what he's talking about. He's taught it before. So I'll ask him questions just like I would ask you guys questions, and then he'll give me his response, and I will probably add on to that sometimes. So let's get started. A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. Can you please tell us what this, a little bit of background about the author and the work itself? Anything that you can tell us about this?
Let's see. William Faulkner was born in Mississippi
Mm-hmm.
back in 1897.
Okay.
He grew up in a wealthy family,
Mm-hmm.
but he wrote a lot of stories about um, different socioeconomic groups in Mississippi.
Right. So I'm hearing a lot of things that sound familiar from the story. How does what his information is, his background, how does that help us better understand A Rose for Emily?
Well, it brings more of an authenticity to it because of the time period the story was written in is probably right around the same time period that some of the older people in Faulkner's life lived in. So a lot of the stories that he wrote about were actual stories that he had heard and adapted into fictional stories.
Okay. Also, I think it's important that he's writing about a town in Mississippi.
And that is
He's
true.
from a town in Mississippi. So that all helps us, these contextual clues help us to understand Faulkner's story of Rose for Emily. One, like my guest said, we know that it's more authentic, right? Because he's from the same area during the same time period, similar to the same time period. And we also know that he's from a wealthy family, right? And our main character is also from at least what used to be a wealthy family. Okay, so moving on, now that we've brought up the setting a little bit, what is our setting for A Rose for Emily?
Let's see. There are a couple indicators in the story that give you the setting. If you look on page 119,
Okay,
it gives you the section that starts off with alive. Miss Emily had been a tradition, a duty, and a care. Right there, it tells you that starting on the day in 1894,
that's when they had exempt her from the taxes, yes. So I see that, guys, if you're looking on page 119 of your handout, then you should be able to see what our guest is talking about. It distinctly tells us a date. Now that date's important, 1894, because not only does it tell us the setting, it gives us a very important clue into the setting, which means this is the date that the town, through Colonel Sartoris, actually granted Emily's family an exemption from the taxes. So this is also kind of symbolic, right? This is basically the town saying, we are going to be responsible for your taxes, and we're not going to hold you accountable like we do other people, right? Okay, so now we know the year. How do we know where? So remember, setting is always time and place. So we know the time. How do we know the place?
so for the place, we have to work just a little bit harder.
Okay.
On page 121, Faulkner uses the word Jefferson. When Miss Emily is speaking, she's saying that she doesn't have to pay any taxes in Jefferson.
Right.
Jefferson is a town in Mississippi. It's actually a fictional town that William Faulkner made up, and he actually uses it in a lot of his writing. So if you're familiar with Faulkner at all, then you would know when she says Jefferson that they're living in the town of Jefferson, Mississippi.
Okay, so if we can all look on page 121 closer to the bottom, you should be able to see this dialogue between Miss Emily and the new tax collectors who have come to get their share of the taxes. And if you remember this scene, basically Miss Emily is not having it. And she tells them, I have no taxes in Jefferson. And it doesn't explicitly say Jefferson County, Jefferson City, town, whatever. But as our guest pointed out, if we're familiar with Faulkner, then we would know that Jefferson is actually a fictional town in Mississippi. Basically, we can assume this is based on his town. He's going to be talking about setting indicators that he was probably familiar with growing up. So now we know the setting. And why is the setting important? Well, without the setting, we have no context into understanding what's happening in the story. So we now know that this is happening during and around 1894, and it's happening in Jefferson, Mississippi. So what are some things that immediately pop into our head when we think about Jefferson, Mississippi, or a town like Jefferson, Mississippi, in the South, in 1894. We can imagine that things for a woman was not super easy. Things for a minority of any type was not very easy. And we have a few different minorities that are talked about in this story, right? We have women, we have black people, we have gay people. So there's quite a few minorities that are talked about, and we should pay attention to how the town and how society in general is treating these people. So let's look back at the story now. I've talked a lot about the setting, so and also the author. Keep in mind that when you're talking about these short stories or any piece of literature, you want to delve into a little bit of background information, which is always going to include the author and also the setting of the story. But now let's talk a little bit about how we're going to use these literary concepts. So the first literary concept we need to talk about is our themes, right? Because before we can even start off with a thesis and know what we're trying to prove, we need to know which theme we're going to pick. So let's talk about some of the themes that are going on in A Rose for Emily. So can you help me with that? What are some of the themes that you come across when you're reading it?
Well, Faulkner actually really does a very good job of packing a lot of themes into a very small space. But some of the major themes that I see, let's see, definitely A Fall from Grace.
Okay.
That's a major theme in this story.
Pride. We see a lot of stuff dealing with pride because Emily has a lot of pride. And that kind of also leads us into The Fall from Grace. Her family is a very proud family, so that also brings up a new theme, family. How is this family interacting with each other? What is the expectations of family during this time period?
And love is another one.
Yes.
They talk a lot about love and relationships and failed relationships and stigmatized relationships.
So not just love, but maybe toxic love.
Right. Yeah.
And how love can be a bad thing, right? So those are a few, but we can also talk about toxic masculinity and feminism and how those play a role. We see the toxic masculinity happening some with her father, and the way that some of these men are portrayed, and how they feel the need to swoop in and take care of the women or protect them instead of allowing them to live their own independent lives. We also see some feminism happening because we see that Miss Emily, typically during that time period, it would not have been normal for her to stay by herself after her father passed. She would have been expected to go live with family, especially being unmarried, but she actually tries to make it on her own and does make it on her own. And so we see that happening, which is unusual for the time. But we also see kind of the roles of men and women and what was expected during that time period. Right out the gate, the short story is separating the men and the women. In that very first paragraph, it talks about our whole town went to her funeral. The men through a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument, and the women mostly out of curiosity to see the inside of her house. So throughout this entire short story, you see this separation between men and women. So we see a lot of different themes going on.
There's a clear patriarchal authority, all the way back to her.
The women
father
are
telling her
clearly
what suitors
relying
are.
on the men.
Right.
Yeah. And the men feel this need to lead and control, but do they do a good job of that, do you think?
No, I don't think anyone can really.
So I think this is kind of where the toxic masculinity comes in. They feel the need to take care of Emily, okay? But they don't really do a good job of that. And they don't seem to do a good job of leading their women. The women tend to lead them. So you see this behavior amongst the men as if they're the controlling, the leading, but they're not, right? So, there's a lot going on there. Going back on to the family thing, though, we see this in the family dynamics. Emily was completely reliant on her father's guidance and expectations. That's what she lived for, was to please him and to make him proud. And we see how that can actually be toxic as well. It ruined her life. So moving on from themes, you need to remember to stay focused on one theme whenever you're doing your own essay. It doesn't matter which theme. It doesn't even have to be one of the themes that we discussed here today. You can come up with your own theme. But you do need to think of one theme. Remember, a theme is the main idea happening in the literary work. And by main idea, we're talking about what is it that the authors think is so important for the audience to get from this piece of literature. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about symbolism, okay? And what symbols we can see happening in A Rose for Emily that we may want to use as a way of promoting or talking about, helping to prove one of our themes that we pick. So, do you have symbols that you want to talk about?
Probably too many to name. Faulkner.
Okay.
Is,
What are let's
very,
just kind of go through them in order of most important. What you think is most important?
I think some of the most important symbolism in the story is the way that he uses colors to symbolize
Definitely.
different things. He uses lots of different colors. You see gold a lot. You see black, white, some grays in there, rose color. You see lots of different colors, and they all symbolize different things. Right from the very beginning, the very first time they introduce what Emily's house looks like, it says big squarish frame, what had once been white.
Yeah, this is on page 119, guys.
On page 119.
Second paragraph. It was a big squarish frame house that had once been white, decorated with cupolas and spires and scrolled balconies in the heavily lightsome style of the 70s, set on what had once been our most select street.
Yeah, see there again. So you get white and light right next to each other, symbolizing the purity of and the opulence of the home.
And while we're talking about symbols, big squarish frame, talking about the house, gives an idea of sturdiness. And but this is all past tense, isn't it, guys? It says it was and it had been once, right? So again, they're referencing the past stability, the past purity of the family that lives here. Okay, so you talked about a lot of colors. I want to talk about one that you didn't mention. I see throughout this a lot that where they are talking about the gold and the silver, but they keep talking about how it's tarnished, right?
Right.
So this could also be a symbol, the tarnished metal. And sometimes it's tarnished gold, sometimes it's tarnished silver. But either way, we keep getting this repetitive adjective of tarnish. So what could that symbolize?
A lot of...
Well, first let's talk about what does tarnished mean. So some of these guys out there may not know what tarnished means. When a metal becomes tarnished, it is discolored because it has not been polished enough.
Worn out.
Okay, so if we're using that as a symbol, what do you think it symbolizes?
A fall from grace.
Okay, so back on that theme of a fall from grace, we're talking about how things were once beautiful and opulent, and now they are not so good, right? And we see this same theme with Emily and her family and their fall from grace. Okay, so why do you think we see so much metal in here? Yes, sometimes it's mentioned as tarnished, but what's the deal with all the metal? I mean, obviously, we talk about the gold watch and the chain, and that's on page 121. They also talk at the top of 121 about the gold head at the top of the cane. The silver brush set that she buys the Homer, and we keep seeing what's metal.
I think, particularly in the case of the gold and silver, it just represents wealth, and
Right.
it's always represented wealth. And even though she isn't as wealthy as she once was, she still wants to reach for those times and still
Right. So it's
wants to surround
symbolic for
herself with those
her
things.
as a status symbol.
Correct.
Okay. So we see this being used, but again, the status has been tarnished, right? It's been
Right, in
it's
many
been
cases.
messed up. Okay, and then we also talked about black, which is obviously a symbol of what?
Well, in this world, it'd be the opposite of the white opulence, purity. It would be after things would run down, like when they describe her physical being. That first time they describe her, and she's older, she's wearing all black.
Right.
She's using a black cane because it's
Now, I
supporting
personally
her.
think the clothing could be separate from the cane in terms of why they're both black.
definitely. Oh, I think the cane is more of a direct symbol because it's a black cane, and a cane is used to support someone.
Right.
And her whole life, basically, she's had this Negro man supporting her and helping her and cooking for her
Right.
and cleaning her.
So
home.
she's had a black servant her entire life, and the black cane serves her as well.
Correct.
So obviously there's a symbol there. But her clothing could mean two things, right? One, anytime people wear black, sometimes that's associated with death, mourning, grief,
Mourning.
right? But
point.
also it could mean evil, right? The opposite of pure is impure. So it could also mean some kind of evil or impure thing. And so we can see the symbolism on both sides. I mean, it could be both, it could be one or the other. So, other colors, something you didn't mention was yellow. We see two different uses of yellow. One in the use of the buggy, right, that her and Homer go on these dates with. This could be yellow in terms of like sunshine, happiness, brighter days, right? But then we also see yellow on the pillow when it's molded
Right.
next to the dead body. So that could mean sickness, health, specifically mental health. It means not well. Yellow will typically mean unwell, or it could mean happy. So I think we see both of the uses of yellow here. Was there, the rose color you mentioned. So what can we signify with the rose color?
Number one, roses are red and pink colors, which are usually colors of love, and roses themselves are used
Symbolic
usually
of
as
romantic gestures, yeah.
So the fact that Faulkner uses rose colored is not a coincidence, and the room
That they find the rose colored items in
that
Are-
we eventually find
in the tomb.
right.
Right. So that's significant that we're finding these romantic colors in the tomb of Homer. Right? So why? Right? Why do we have this romance in a tomb?
She kind of, I really feel like Emily met Homer and fell in love with him. Definitely more deeply in love with him than he fell with her.
Yes.
And she kind of just wanted to immortalize that feeling forever.
Very good. I agree. She's trying to set the mood, you know? I mean, there's a lot of symbolic things going on in that bedroom / tomb. I mean, that right there should give you the first clue. It's a bedroom slash tomb. And secondly, we've got all this opulence. We've got rose-colored lights. So, you know, it's almost like she bought a different bulb to make it rose-colored.
Right.
And then also the curtains are
Or
rose-colored. We've got crystal in the
silk
room. We've got the
handkerchief.
silver brush and mirror set. You know, it's very like trying to set the mood.
It's very meticulous. Everything's laid out just right. You can tell a lot of effort went into setting the room up in general.
Absolutely. So, okay, and the last color I want to talk about, because we could go on for days with colors, let me tell you. But the last color I want to talk about is gray. We see gray in lots of different areas. We see gray with her hair, right? So, what's the significance of the graying of her hair and the symbolicness of that? I mean, what happens to hair as we get older?
Hair grays as time passes.
Okay, obviously I got a few. So
the fact that her hair changes so drastically during
Right.
the course of the story is a good way for him to show how much time has actually passed
Right.
in the story.
So it can be a symbolic gesture of time. What do we make about her? The one I want to talk about this one single gray hair. Okay, the one single gray hair, and we all know what I'm talking about. If you read the story, you know what I'm talking about. So, what's the symbolism of that one single gray hair? Even if you don't agree with it, he's shaking his head no because he doesn't necessarily agree, but lots of scholars do agree.
I agree.
Well, you teach 9th and 10th grade. I teach college.
Exactly.
Let's talk about it. Let's get into it. Let's talk about it. So, what can, I mean, even if we're not talking about symbolically, what does that definitely mean?
It definitely means that she had recently been in the bed with the corpse.
At least at some point after she started going gray. And we
Correct.
know that she didn't go gray until at least 6 months after he went missing.
Correct.
Right? So, there's enough to be said right there. Right? The fact that she's still visiting the room. But then if we go, let's just turn
But it
there.
does
Shall
say that no one had been in the room
for quite a while because of dust.
for a while.
Right? I agree with you there, but we're talking about like 30 years later. What was she doing in the room right afterwards?
Right.
Like
But
for a
it-
while afterwards,
but
like
it
up to
doesn't
6
seem
months
like
afterwards.
She continuously visited the room for the next 30 years.
I don't know if she visited the room for the next 30 years. I mean, obviously she gotten sick there toward the end. And at one point it actually says that she shuts the whole top floor off.
Right.
But it was a while before she did that.
And that's why she.
They kept seeing her in the windows for a while before she did that. So, let's look at the very last page on page 130. And it says, "For a long while we just stood there looking down at the profound and fleshless grin." This is talking about the skeleton. "The body had apparently once lain in the attitude of an embrace. But now the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquers even the grimace of love, had cuckolded him." What is the term cuckold? Can you explain that to my students? It was
Kinda
used
means-
often in like the Middle Ages.
Yeah, it kind of means swindled.
But it's specifically
used sexually.
Right.
Usually when someone's cheating on someone else.
They used to use it
They
often
usually
for
call it
husbands,
cuckold,
right?
right.
Like a husband could be cuckolded by another man. But
Right.
in this term, they're obviously not talking about a man being cuckolded by another man. It's talking about the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquers the grimace of love, had cuckolded him. So, meaning the long sleep, death, had cuckolded him, had cheated him out of the idea of love. What was left of him rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt. and had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay. Basically, they just melded together. And upon him, and upon the pillow beside him, lay that even coating of the patient and biting dust. So again, like you said, even coating. So once she left him alone, she left him alone.
Right.
Okay. Can we go back and talk about had once lain in the attitude of an
He
embrace?
died, or he at least became stiff in an embrace. He
Right.
rigor mortis set in while he was
Embracing something.
Which the reader can only assume was Emily.
Ew. So, and how do we know that he had once lain in the attitude of an embrace? Well, the only way we would know that is if rigor mortis set in, and then she had broken his arms to get out of it. So, that's awful to think about. But no, let's go further. Then we notice that in the second pillow was the indention of a head. This guy was not two-headed. So we know Emily had been laying beside him after she got out of the embrace at some point, long enough to make an indention in the pillow, right?
Right. Now, see, the only thing about that is a pillow is not going to hold an indention for
Unless it's a really
a real
old
long time.
pillow
And unless someone was there
consistently
for a long time,
for a
like
long
for
period of
days
time.
and days.
or repeatedly went back for a long period of time. Like if you slept in that same spot night after night. So, then it says, one of us lifted something from it, and leaning forward, that faint and invisible dust dry and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron gray hair. Now, iron gray was also how they referred to her hair earlier in the story. So we know this was Emily's hair. She was the one who did all this, right? Dun dun dun. So, what can we assume from that passage? Well, assume what you want, right? But scholars tend to agree that Emily was practicing in necrophilia. Now, if you don't know what the term necrophilia means, basically it's when people have sex with dead people. So, talk about a fall from grace, right? And this idea and sense of pride, and how her family was so haughty and stuck up, right? So she has this really dark secret, right? So, I want to move on from the symbolism of color. Are there other symbols that we see that you think are really important to point out?
Oh yeah, there are a lot of other symbols. One of the simplest symbols probably are the taxes themselves that
Okay.
Emily,
Absolutely.
that Emily doesn't feel like she has to pay, and then now the new town's council basically feel like she does have to pay, and it symbolizes her connection with society. Another symbol that symbolizes that really well is when she refuses to get the numbers above her door and refuses to get a mailbox.
Absolutely, same type of symbol.
Right, she is
She's basically
completely
saying,
cutting
I'm not going to be a
herself
part
off
of this
from
society. Yeah.
Right.
But in terms of her connection to society, I like the symbol of the market basket, because it's like her only connection to society.
Right.
For years and years, she sits in that house, and the only thing that she
never
gets,
carries it either.
right, she has her servant carry it, and he will go get things from the outside world and bring it to her in that market basket.
It's her literal lifeline.
Yes. Another symbol that I think is important is the picture of her dad, right? He passes away, and she keeps that crayon picture of him in the main room there, and he's just kind of looming over her, just like he loomed over her during her life. He continues to loom over her during her death, and we know that he was very important to her, based on the way that she reacted when he died, which I think is also an important point to make on the whole necrophilia point. Because we have to keep in mind that Emily probably did not see Homer as dead, just like she did not see her dad as passed.
Correct, because it says what for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
She tells people for 3 days that he's not dead, and then it's only when she knows that they're gonna basically bust in her house and take him that she breaks down, and they finally get her father and bury him. But
Yes,
she
this
was
is on
definitely
page
in denial
123,
about
guys.
it, and I'm thinking that she probably was the same way with Homer. I'm not sure how long she was in denial about it, but it's
There
pretty
was no one
clear.
breaking down the doors trying to make her give up that fantasy,
Right.
as with her dad.
Right.
So it could have went on for
Years.
who knows.
Who knows?
And now some people may think to themselves, what was Toby thinking? What was he doing? One, give us some type of mentality about what Toby's life was like during this time period and why he would have been so submissive to Miss Emily.
Well, number one, Toby in the story isn't a slave.
Right.
But based on Toby's age, he very well was probably born on a plantation.
Right.
He was probably born a slave.
He was probably their slave.
Right. He was probably
And had just
actually-
kind of stayed
kind
with
of-
the family.
He actually had probably grown up a bit as a slave
With Emily.
with Emily.
Yes.
So he felt a connection to her and her family.
Mm-hmm.
She fed him, literally.
Housed him.
Gave him all of his necessities for life. So he felt, again.
So there's a
obligated
kinship
by her.
feeling on one level.
Correct.
But on another level, there's a very real, I'm a lower class than you.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So even if you do something wrong, they're going to blame it on me anyway.
Right,
So I might as well cover your tracks
right.
and make sure I'm taken care of.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
it's clear that Emily killed
Homer.
Homer.
Yes.
She bought the poison. Right after they mentioned the poison, they mentioned that Homer's never seen it again.
Right.
It's also
It's
mentioned-
premeditated.
right, and it's also mentioned that Toby does what it seems to be all of the household duties, which would include the cooking and cleaning. So he definitely knew about the plot to kill Homer, and I'm sure he knew that the body was never disposed of either.
I mean, logistically, we have to think about this. One, who did the cooking? Arsenic is something that would have been ingested. How do you get someone to ingest it? You feed it to them or you give them something to drink. Who was serving all the food?
Right.
Who was making all the food?
Toby.
Toby, right? So the only way he could have even gotten that arsenic would have been Toby
Toby
giving it to
put it in
him.
the food.
Now, who bought it? Emily. Emily obviously was the one masterminding the whole thing,
Right.
but she clearly made Toby give it to him because she didn't even do the cooking or or any of that. Secondly,
And that's another
arsenic,
thing,
if
if
she gave
he's-
him enough, would have worked immediately,
Right.
or at least made him very sick and drowsy.
And if Toby is involved, he's a lot less likely to. He kind of has to
Right.
go with it because now he's involved in the murder.
Right,
also.
he's an accomplice. And also, how does she get him upstairs? Right?
Right.
Logistically,
There's
she
no way she can
yeah,
carry him
she's a
upstairs.
small woman.
She's very. They talk about her being very short, and
Diminutive,
small
yes.
bones. They said, and they talk about Homer, as a working man. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he was fairly large, and he was a boss.
Right.
So he had been working for a while. So I'm sure
He's the one who actually physically took care of Homer.
right.
But it was all at her doing. So we have to think about these things in terms of understanding Toby's motive. But also keep in mind, he was aware of what happened. He was aware of what was going to happen if he got caught. And that's why he left immediately, right? Okay, so any other major symbols we want to talk about? I know you had written a bunch down. I know there were some that I wanted to talk about.
I mean, just there are lots of symbols. Another major one is just the symbol of her last name in general.
Yeah.
The weight that her last name carries and the prestige that it carries.
They actually
And-
use it as an adjective
Right.
quite a bit, right? Yeah,
They
there-
talk about her cousins being
more Grierson
Right.
than Emily, which is an adjective for stuck up and think they're better than us.
right. So they say, many times that the Grierson name carries a certain weight to it and a certain expectation. And to see someone from a family and a name at such heights sink to such lows and do the things that Emily does is a very stark contrast, and it's actually ironic. It can go right into irony also.
Right, which we're not there yet, but yes, you're absolutely right on that. Any other symbols? Because we're going to have to wrap it up for today's class. We'll finish talking about this on Wednesday's video. We'll start in on Wednesday with irony, since he already started us off on irony. But I do want to talk about any other symbols that we have before, because when we start on Wednesday, I don't want to pick up on symbols. Dust, yes. Dust is all throughout this short story, right? We keep seeing dust being mentioned, and we can see that as a symbol for kind of one, there's the saying, when the dust settles, right? Which is often used in a way to signify when this is all said and done, something will come to light, right? Which is exactly what happens in this short story. Also, the dust signifies,
But also, the dust only settles after it's been kicked up in the first place. When something great collapses, there's a cloud of dust. And then once the dust settles, you have the ruins left, which is what Emily's life is right now, is in ruins.
right. And dust also signifies not being cared for, properly taken care of, right?
Yeah.
Because if something's dusted, then you don't have the dust,
Correct.
right? Or untouched. For instance, that tomb, right? I don't think that it wasn't that she cared. I think that it was just being untouched,
Right.
saved.
Right.
Let me look and see if I see any other symbols. I kind of wanted to talk about,
The tableau description on 123.
yes. Now, if you look on to 123, the town actually talks about their vision of how they always envisioned Emily and her father. And we can see this as one huge symbol for their beliefs about who they were. And if we look at 123, about the middle of the second paragraph, we see it starts, none of the young men were quite good enough for Miss Emily and such. We had long thought of them as a tableau. Miss Emily, a slender figure in white in the background, her father, a spraddled silhouette in the foreground, his back to her and clutching a horsewhip, the two of them framed by the back-flung front door. So when she got to be 30 and was still single, we were not pleased exactly, but vindicated. So what is that symbolic of for the town? What is the town saying with this tableau in their mind of what? There was no actual picture that looked like this, but in their mind, when they thought of Emily and her father, this is the picture they had in their mind. Let's break it down. So we've got the father with the horsewhip. That's
Yeah.
obviously symbolic
Right.
of
Of demanding and
toxic masculinity.
toxic masculinity.
Yes. So he was demanding, controlling,
And demanding. But yeah.
that toxic masculinity. And then we also have Miss Emily in white, which again means
Innocent, pure,
virgin,
virgin.
plain and simple virgin here, because nobody was touching her. Her daddy wasn't allowing that.
Correct.
And so,
Beating them off with the whip.
and then we also have the two of them framed by the back flung front door. Now, framed by the back flung front door means in their mind they picture both of them outside of the house, but exactly centered of the front door with it wide open,
And Emily's
like
in the
slung
background.
open. Emily's in the background,
Her
father's in the foreground.
So he's larger, obviously, and
Right.
more imposing of a figure. Emily's kind of the afterthought in the back.
Right. And that house is also huge because
Right.
they only vision them in front of that house.
Mhm.
And
the house itself is a symbol.
the house itself is a symbol because think about it, it was in this neighborhood that was basically the highfalutin neighborhood for a long time back when it was first built. But then everything around it kind of got sold and
It says on the first
became
page.
kind of a bad neighborhood.
Yeah, it says on the first page.
And the house ended up becoming destitute and not taken care of properly because of the lack of money. So I think they refer to it as an eyesore among eyesores on 119.
Yeah.
An eyesore among eyesores. It says, only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores.
Yeah, right before this,
Yeah.
it had once been our most select street, so it was.
Yes. So this is a symbol of a time past when things were opulent and people were almost nobility in this country. And then this is right after the fall of slavery. And so we have a lot of these families who were prominent, nobility, and who probably made their money off of their livelihood and slave trade, right? And we are not told explicitly, but we can assume that that's what her father made his money in because they were very wealthy.
Yeah.
Then it's after the war,
It's
and all of a
pretty-
sudden they're
it's pretty
poor.
clear that their money came from slaves, whether it was slave labor or slave trading or whatever it may have been. Because
Well,
that-
considering they're not living on a plantation, I'm assuming
It's
it's
probably
probably
slave
slave trade. Yeah.
right.
But either way, we know that again, horsewhip. That's a big symbol of
Right.
slavery. So this house is symbolic, and there are so many other symbols in here. I mean, I probably wrote down 50 different symbols before we started the talk, but we're getting up onto our 50-minute mark, so I'm going to go ahead, let you guys go. Again, start on your research. Start thinking about that theme, the one you want to focus on, and start going through and highlighting for symbols that'll help you prove that theme. On Wednesday, our discussion will be about irony, similes, metaphors, character analysis, and then on Friday, we will do a research discussion talking about research and how to use that and implement that into your paper. Okay, guys, so hopefully everyone's safe and well. If you need to communicate with me, do so through email. That's going to be the best way to do it. If you send a message through Canvas, it comes straight to my email, so you can do that as well. If you're having problems with the course, need to discuss anything, let me know. If you don't talk to me, I have no way to know that. Hope you guys had a great spring break. See you on Wednesday.